The kettle was just starting to hiss when the phone rang. Claire had one hand on the tea bag, the other steadying her breath. It had been a normal morning. Sophie had left for school with a half-zipped backpack and a jelly stain on her cheek. The sun had climbed just high enough to warm the kitchen tiles, and Claire had finally sat down to make a grocery list. Then her world fractured. She almost didn't pick up. The number was unfamiliar, local, but not saved. Something about it tugged at her chest. The quiet before the chaos. She pressed her thumb to the green button and said hello. What she heard next wasn't noise, it was absence, a strange stillness from the man on the other end. Then, professionally but gently, he spoke. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm calling from St. Vincent's Emergency. Your husband, Jonah, there's been an incident." Her mind tripped over the formality. Not Claire, not Jonah had a fall. Words came next like ice water poured slow. Collapse, no pulse. Cardiac arrest. She didn't speak, didn't breathe. The tea bag in her hand stained the counter in a slow, spreading bloom. She didn't remember sitting down, only that the linoleum felt cold. The doctor's voice drifted somewhere in the air, still speaking, still careful, still trying to soften the blow that would never land soft enough. She whispered thank you. Not because she meant it, because it was the only word she could trust not to crack her open. She called her parents next. It rang 3 times before her mother picked up, laughter in the background, clinking glasses, music. Claire's voice barely held together. "Mom, something happened. Jonah, he's..." Her mother cut in, cheerful and quick. "Claire, honey, can you call us tomorrow? We're in the middle of Josh's birthday dinner. Everyone's here. It's just not a good time." Claire opened her mouth, but the silence that followed was her answer. The call ended with a casual, "Love you, sweetie," and the line went dead. She sat alone on the kitchen floor, her phone pressed to her palm like a brand. Her husband was gone. Her family had asked her to wait until morning. The kettle screamed. She didn't move. The tea had already gone cold. Claire didn't cry at the funeral, not because she didn't want to, but because her daughter was watching. 8-year-old Sophie gripped her hand so tightly the knuckles turned white. Her dark curls framed a face too young to understand permanence, but old enough to feel the shift in the air. Jonah's photo stood at the front of the chapel, framed, smiling, alive. Claire focused on it like a tether. The rows behind them weren't full. A few coworkers, some neighbors, one of Jonah's cousins who flew in last minute. Her family, her own parents and brother, weren't there. Her mother had texted that morning, "Still trying to get flights sorted. We'll plan a visit soon. Take care of yourself." Josh hadn't even bothered. His Instagram, still public, told a louder story. Rooftop parties, poolside cocktails. A group shot captioned, "Cancun Crew." It was posted the same morning Claire picked out the urn. She didn't show Sophie. She never would. Some wounds weren't hers to pass down. After the service, people drifted. They offered the usual lines. "He's in a better place. You're so strong. If you need anything." Claire nodded, thanked them, and stood steady. Grief, she learned, made people uncomfortable, especially quiet grief, especially when you didn't fall apart. Back home, the house felt like someone had pressed mute on her life. The hall where Jonah used to sing off-key, the kitchen where he taught Sophie to stir pancake batter, silent. Claire poured cereal for dinner. Sophie didn't complain. She just sat on the couch, hugging her niece, eyes too wide. That night, Claire tucked her daughter in and lay beside her until the small, rhythmic breaths told her she'd slipped into sleep. Then she sat in the hallway for a long time, her back against the wall, Jonah's jacket still hanging from the hook above her. She pulled it down and wrapped it around herself. It didn't smell like him anymore, just fabric. But she held it anyway. No calls came, no offers to fly in. Her parents sent a sympathy card 4 days late. Thinking of you both. Love, Mom and Dad. It arrived with a confetti-filled envelope from Josh, labeled Belated B-Day Bash. Pics in it. Claire stared at it for a moment before dropping it in the trash, unopened. Grief didn't come in sobs. It came in the grocery list with Jonah's favorite cereal still written at the bottom. In the single toothbrush in the holder. In the echo of laughter that had once filled their kitchen. It came in the realization that her family, those who should have circled around her, had turned their backs the moment it required inconvenience. In the vacuum they left, Claire did what she'd always done. She picked up the pieces. She held her daughter tighter, and she stayed quiet. But something inside her shifted that week. Not loud, not explosive, just enough to plant a seed, the kind that grows roots before anyone notices it's even there. There was a time when Claire believed her family would show up for anything. She remembered the years when Sunday dinners were sacred, roasts laid out with practiced precision, her mother's table set with the same chipped china from her wedding registry. Claire and Josh would argue over who carved the turkey, who poured the wine. Laughter came easily then, rising and falling like a song everyone knew the words to. Before Jonah. He wasn't an outsider, not at first. He was charming in the quiet way. Always helped with dishes, remembered birthdays, bought her mother peonies, even when it wasn't a holiday. Josh used to like him too. They'd talk basketball and fantasy leagues, send each other ridiculous memes well past midnight. Claire had thought she'd won something rare, love that blended families instead of fracturing them. But Jonah was steady, reliable. And something about that started to crack the surface. It began small. Comments Josh thought she wouldn't hear. Mr. Perfect. Doesn't blink without a spreadsheet. Her mother started insisting on separate holiday plans, calling Jonah's presence a bit intense for a relaxed evening. Claire tried to smooth things over, tried to bridge the gap, until she realized the bridge was one-sided. They didn't like how she changed with Jonah. How she grew firmer in her boundaries, more private, less available to fill the emotional gaps they'd gotten used to her patching. Even when Sophie was born, the shift didn't correct. Her father came to the hospital but stayed 10 minutes. Her mother asked if Claire had really thought this through when they bought their first home. Josh never remembered Sophie's birthday unless Facebook reminded him. Still, Claire kept the door open. She sent invites. She mailed cards. She made the calls, even when they went unanswered, when Jonah died, and no one showed up. Something inside her finally went still. She walked through the house that night, touching framed photos like artifacts. Her wedding, Sophie's 3rd birthday, one Thanksgiving years ago, where everyone had still smiled like it was real. She wondered how long she'd been pretending. In the kitchen, leftovers from the funeral sat untouched in containers. A neighbor had brought a casserole. Someone else dropped off pastries. But Claire couldn't bring herself to eat any of it. She opened the fridge, stared blankly, then shut it again. The dining table remained set for 3. She didn't move the extra plate. Just stood there, staring at it, remembering the first time Jonah had joined them for dinner. How he'd laughed at her dad's bad jokes, listened to her mother recount old stories with practiced patience. He'd squeezed her hand under the table when Josh started in about his new business idea, murmuring, "He means well, just doesn't know how to land the plane." Claire exhaled, long and slow. That chair across from her would stay empty now. But the quiet wasn't empty. It was instructive. It told her exactly who she was without them. And that was the beginning. It was a Tuesday morning when the question came. Claire had just returned from walking Sophie to school, her hands still chilled from the wind. She poured herself a mug of coffee she wouldn't finish and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of unopened mail. Most of it was junk: credit card offers, pre-approved loans, political flyers. Then her phone buzzed. Her mother's name lit up the screen. Claire hesitated before answering, pressing the mug to her lips without sipping. "Claire, sweetheart," her mother said, voice too bright, too measured. "Just checking in." Claire blinked. The funeral had been 2 weeks ago. Her mother hadn't called once since. No visits, no flowers, just a sympathy card signed with a heart and nothing else. "I'm here," Claire said flatly. There was a pause, then a shift in tone. Lower, more deliberate. "I was just wondering, did Jonah have any life insurance?" Claire sat back in her chair. The question didn't surprise her. The timing did. She didn't answer right away. Her thumb traced the rim of her mug as she watched a squirrel dart across the fence outside. "Yes," she said finally. "He did." Her mother's breath caught, barely audible. "Oh, well, that's good, I suppose. For you and Sophie." Claire didn't speak. She waited. Her mother filled the silence. "I only ask because, well, you're on your own now, and it's expensive raising a child. If there's any way we can help manage things or offer guidance, not help, not support, just oversight." Claire's voice was even. "I've got it covered." Another pause. Then her mother's voice softened, as if trying a different angle. "It's just that Jonah was so organized. I imagine he planned for all this, maybe even set something aside for family." There it was. Claire stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street was still. A dog barked in the distance. The sky threatened rain. "He left things in order," Claire said. "But anything he left was for Sophie and me. No one else?" Her mother's voice cooled. Of course. Just wanted to check. You know we're always here for you." Claire didn't answer that. She ended the call soon after, polite but final. She stood at the window for a long time after. The coffee had gone cold again. That afternoon, she pulled out the envelope from the lawyer's office, the one marked personal and confidential. Inside was a preliminary summary of the will. Jonah had been methodical, intentional. Every detail accounted for. He'd left instructions not just for assets, but protections, contingencies, trust terms that couldn't be bypassed. Claire hadn't even known how deep his planning went. But reading his words, she felt something stir beneath the ache. He had known who she'd be left to face. And he had built a wall around her and Sophie before his heart gave out. She placed the documents back in their folder. If her family thought grief had made her soft, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. He showed up with flowers. Josh, her brother, knocked on Claire's door 2 Sundays after that call from their mother, a plastic-wrapped bouquet of supermarket lilies in one hand, a 6-pack of craft beer in the other. He wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and his grin was too bright for a man arriving at a widow's doorstep. Claire didn't invite him in right away. He shifted his weight, glanced past her shoulder like he expected a different version of the house. "Place looks smaller," he said. Jonah's energy made it feel bigger, I guess. She said nothing, just held the door open long enough for him to take the hint. Inside, he walked with the casual entitlement of someone who had never been told no. He placed the flowers on the counter, cracked open a beer without asking, and sat on the couch like he hadn't missed the funeral entirely. Claire remained standing. "How's the kid?" he asked. "Sophie's at a friend's," she said. Josh nodded, took a long sip, and then glanced at her over the rim of the bottle. "You holding up?" She didn't answer that. Not directly. Instead, she folded her arms and watched him study the room. His gaze lingered on the bookshelf Jonah built, the framed photos, the absence of laughter. He leaned back and gave a low whistle. "You know, Jonah was a good guy. Not flashy, but smart. Quiet money, you know?" Claire's stomach tightened. Josh continued, oblivious or indifferent to the shift in her expression. "I was talking to Mom. She said he had life insurance. You're probably set for a while." It wasn't a question. It was a probe. Claire's voice was quiet. "That's not something I'm discussing with you." Josh shrugged, raising his bottle in a mock toast. "Hey, just looking out. I mean, family's family, right? We all stick together." She almost laughed at that. Almost. Instead, she said, "You weren't at the funeral." He blinked. "I couldn't get a flight. Everything was booked. Last minute. You know how it is." She did know. She'd seen the Cancun photos. Poolside cocktails. A sparkler in his hand while she was picking out burial clothes. Josh stood, wandered toward the hallway where Jonah's office had been. Claire stepped in front of him. "That's not a shared space anymore," she said. He raised his hands, smiling like it was all a misunderstanding. "Chill, I'm not snooping, just remembering the layout." But his eyes had already flicked toward the door. Claire didn't move. A minute later, he made his excuses, said he'd check in soon, gave her a one-armed hug that landed on her shoulder like a formality. He left the beer behind. After the door clicked shut, Claire stood in the silence for a long time. She stared at the bouquet on the counter. It smelled faintly of rot, already wilting at the edges. She dumped it in the trash without ceremony. They weren't here for her. They were circling something else. Something Jonah left behind. The envelope came on a Wednesday morning. Claire nearly missed it in the stack of credit card offers and property tax reminders. It was plain, no logo, addressed in a careful serif font that gave nothing away. She sliced it open with the edge of a butter knife. Inside, a letter on thick stationery. From the law office of Benedict and Hale. Re. Last will and testament of Jonah R. Holloway. Her. Fingers tightened around the page. She sat at the kitchen table, laid the rest of the envelope's contents out in a neat row. Official language, procedural instructions, a meeting date. The will had been updated 6 months before Jonah's death. During a quiet stretch, Claire barely remembered now. He'd mentioned visiting a lawyer back then, casually, almost like it was routine. He hadn't said what for. Now she understood. She read each page twice, then a third time. Jonah had left everything, assets, savings, the house, the trust, for Claire and Sophie. But that wasn't what caught her breath. It was the clause at the end. If any named family member contested the distribution of assets, they would forfeit all rights to any secondary trusts or discretionary disbursements. No appeals, no second chances. Jonah had written it in clean legalese, but the message beneath it was unmistakable. If they come for her, they walk away with nothing. Claire leaned back in her chair and stared out the window. The street was still. The neighbor's wind chimes knocked gently in the breeze. She pressed the page flat against the table and ran her fingers over Jonah's signature. It was steady, intentional. He had seen this coming. He had known. She reached for her phone almost on instinct to call someone, then stopped. There was no one on the other end of that call who would understand. Her parents hadn't even asked how Sophie was doing. Josh had shown up with beer and a smirk, then sniffed around like a dog looking for scraps. She folded the documents and returned them to the envelope. slid it into the drawer where she kept the bills and insurance paperwork. Everything in one place now. Everything accounted for. Jonah had always believed in structure. Claire used to tease him about it. His labeled folders, his endless checklists, the way he always carried 2 pens. Now she saw it differently. This wasn't paperwork. It was protection. And it wasn't just about money. It was about Sophie. About leaving no room for the vultures. About ensuring the people who failed to show up in life wouldn't benefit in death. Claire stood and walked to the hallway, pausing outside Jonah's old office. She opened the door. The desk was still tidy, the air faintly carrying the scent of cedar and ink. She sat in his chair and let the silence wash over her. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. But something in her spine straightened. Jonah had left her more than assets. He'd left her the tools to fight back. The lawyer's office was quiet, cool, and too pristine. Everything smelled faintly of leather and dust. Claire sat near the window, Sophie at her side coloring with a quiet focus that made her mother ache. Her daughter didn't understand what this meeting meant. Not really. She just knew that Daddy was gone, and everyone was suddenly more serious than usual. Claire's parents arrived first. Her mother wore pearls. Her father didn't meet Claire's eyes. Josh came in last, 10 minutes late, smelling faintly of cologne and entitlement. He gave Claire a once-over like she was the one being judged. The receptionist called them in. The conference room had a long glass table and too many chairs. Claire chose one at the end. Sophie sat beside her, flipping through a picture book. No one else spoke. Her mother glanced around the room like she expected catering. Josh leaned back, arms crossed. The lawyer, Mr. Benedict, entered with a folder under one arm and a laptop in the other. He greeted them all with professional neutrality, then sat, opened his file, and clicked a small remote. The screen at the end of the room lit up. A video began. It was Jonah. Claire's breath caught before she could stop it. There he was, solid, calm, seated in the same blue sweater he wore on quiet Sundays. He looked into the camera with eyes that still carried weight. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means I didn't get to say goodbye the way I wanted." His voice was steady. There was no emotion in it, but every word felt carved from something final. He continued, "This isn't about grief. This is about clarity. I want what I've built to go where it was meant to. Claire and Sophie, everything I own, everything I've saved, is for you. Not out of obligation, but because you are my family." Claire's hands tightened in her lap. Josh shifted in his seat. Jonah's eyes didn't flinch. "To the rest of you, if you are listening, it means I believe there would be questions. Let me answer them now." He paused, then delivered the line that changed the air in the room. "If anyone contests this will, they will be permanently disqualified from all other distributions. That includes the discretionary family trusts. No negotiations, no exceptions." Claire didn't blink. Her mother let out a soft gasp. Josh sat, up straight. The video ended there. No farewell, no soft wrap-up, just Jonah, quiet and resolute, laying down a boundary none of them had expected. The lawyer cleared his throat. "The legal documentation matches the video declaration. We'll now proceed with the formal reading of the will." Claire exhaled slowly. She didn't look at her family. She didn't need to. She felt the shift, the ripple of discomfort, of recognition. They had come expecting division, leverage, maybe even control. But Jonah had already drawn the lines, and the silence in the room was no longer hers to carry. The room stayed quiet for a beat too long after the video ended. Claire could hear the hum of the overhead lights, the soft turn of a page as Sophie flipped her book, oblivious to the tension gathering like a storm. Josh was the first to speak. "This is a joke, right?" His laugh was short, sharp, a cover for the heat rising in his face. You're telling me he left everything, to Claire and her kid? And we're just supposed to smile and nod? Mr. Benedict didn't flinch. The terms are legally sound. Mr. Holloway updated the documents 6 months prior to his passing. All assets, including liquid funds, property, and investments, are assigned solely to Claire and Sophie Holloway. Josh leaned forward, the chair creaking under his weight. What about the family trust? Grandpa's account? The beach property in Maine? Mr. Benedict turned a page in his file. The family trust remains intact. However, per Mr. Holloway's instructions, any attempt to dispute the terms of this will result in immediate forfeiture of all claims to said trust. Claire said nothing. She watched the flush crawl up Josh's neck. Her mother shifted beside him, lips pressed into a thin line. This is unbelievable, Josh muttered. He wasn't even blood. He married in. Claire met his eyes. He was more family than you've ever been. Her mother's hand found Josh's forearm, a subtle signal to stay calm, but it was too late. The veneer had cracked. Don't act like you're above this, Josh snapped. You've always acted like you were better than us. And now what? Jonah dies and you get to walk away with the whole pot? That's not how this works. Mr. Benedict cleared his throat. Actually, it is. Josh stood, pushing back his chair. You're both pathetic. This was manipulated. He was probably already sick. You twisted this whole thing. Claire's voice was low. He did it because he knew how you'd react. He knew who would show up and who wouldn't. Her mother looked away. Her father hadn't spoken once. Josh turned toward the lawyer. We'll contest it. There's no way this holds up. We have a right to... But Mr. Benedict raised a hand, interrupting without raising his voice. If you proceed, you forfeit the trust. Your name will be removed from all future disbursements. That includes the quarterly draws you've received for the last 7 years. Josh froze. Claire watched the realization bloom across his face. The money wasn't hypothetical. It was real. And walking away from it meant walking away from a lifestyle he'd never truly earned. He sat back down, slower this time. Claire folded her hands in her lap. She didn't need to argue. The work had already been done. Jonah had made sure of that. For the first time since the funeral, she felt her pulse slow. The will wasn't a windfall, it was a shield, and it had landed exactly where it needed to. The office emptied in fragments. Claire stayed seated, watching her family peel away one by one. Her mother was the first to leave, face pinched, not from grief, but from something sourer, disappointment that couldn't quite be disguised. She didn't say goodbye, just collected her purse and swept out of the room like someone exiting a dinner party that had turned awkward. Josh lingered. He hovered near the door, fiddling with his phone, jaw clenched. The easy charm he wore like armor had cracked, and beneath it was something messier, entitlement stripped of its usual confidence. He looked at Claire once, like he was about to speak, then seemed to think better of it. He left without a word. Claire sat still. The lawyer offered her a quiet nod. Everything's in order, he said, gently pushing a folder toward her. This includes the full estate breakdown. I'll be your point of contact moving forward. She thanked him with a nod, her voice not quite ready to return. Outside, the air was sharp, with the smell of city pavement warming under the sun. Sophie tugged at her hand as they walked toward the car. Why was Uncle Josh so mad? She asked, her voice small. Claire paused at the passenger door, crouched so they were eye level. Because sometimes people expect things that aren't theirs, she said, and when they don't get them, they blame. Whoever's closest. Sophie nodded, like she understood enough to stop asking. She climbed into her seat and pulled her seatbelt across her lap with practiced precision. Claire closed the door and stood for a moment, letting the silence settle around her. Back home, the phone rang 3 times in 2 hours. First her mother, no message. Then Josh. Then her father. She didn't pick up. Not because she was avoiding them, but because there was nothing left to explain. The will had spoken. Jonah had made his intentions clear. Anything else was noise. By that evening, the messages had shifted tone. Josh accused her of manipulation, called her selfish, said she'd twisted Jonah into cutting them out. Her mother's voicemail dripped with hurt pride. I just don't understand how you could let it come to this. We're family. Claire deleted it before it finished playing. She opened Jonah's folder again. The pages were still crisp, the legal language heavy with certainty. She read the clause once more. Contest and forfeit. There was no ambiguity, no wiggle room. Jonah had left no cracks for them to crawl through. She slid the folder back into the drawer, closed it softly. In the quiet that followed, Claire felt something unfamiliar. Not triumph, not relief, just stillness. The kind that comes when the shouting stops and the dust begins to settle. The kind that tells you the storm isn't returning, because the people who brought the thunder had finally been locked out. It had been a Tuesday. Late afternoon. The light in the house was soft, golden, the kind of light that made everything feel a little more forgiving. Claire had been folding laundry on the couch, the quiet rhythm of domestic life settling over her like a warm blanket. Jonah stood in the doorway of Sophie's room, watching their daughter sleep. She dreams with her hands clenched, he'd said, smiling, like she's holding on to something important. Claire looked up from a towel she was folding. She always does, even as a baby. Jonah crossed the room and sat beside her. He didn't speak for a moment, just leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the kind of posture he used when he was about to say something that mattered. I went to see the lawyer today, he said. Claire paused. For what? He didn't answer right away. Just updating things. The will, the trust, getting everything in line. She placed the towel down. Jonah, are you feeling okay? He reached over and took her hand. I'm fine. I just want things to be clear, in case anything ever happens. There was a quiet between them then, not heavy, not fearful, just still. I'm not planning to go anywhere, he said, but I've seen how messy things can get when people assume, when they think grief is a weakness to exploit. Claire knew what he meant. She had grown up around the kind of family that mistook boundaries for betrayal, that believed proximity alone earned them acclaim. Jonah continued, voice low. If something ever happens, I want you to have everything you need. I don't want you spending months untangling paperwork or fighting off people who didn't show up when it counted. He looked at her then, steady. This isn't just about protecting what we built. It's about protecting your peace. You and Sophie. You're the whole story. She had nodded, unsure what else to say. There was something final in the way he spoke, not morbid, but resolute. Like he had already walked through the possibility of absence and was leaving her map back to herself. They didn't talk about it again after that. Life kept moving. School pickups, dinner, work, the slow pulse of ordinary days. But that conversation stayed lodged in a corner of Claire's memory, untouched, like a sealed envelope she didn't want to open. Now, in the wake of it all, it came back with sharp clarity, the calmness in his voice, the deliberate care in his planning. He hadn't known the timing, but he had known the truth. He'd seen the fracture lines, and he'd laid the foundation to hold them at bay. Claire sat in the quiet of the house that night, hands resting on the will. She whispered once softly to the room around her, "Thank you, not just for the protection, but for seeing what she hadn't wanted to admit, and preparing her anyway." The letter came home in Sophie's backpack, folded neatly in half with a gold star sticker sealing the crease. Claire found it while unpacking lunch containers and a wrinkled permission slip for the class field trip. She almost missed it, almost tossed it into the growing pile of school papers she meant to read later. But something about the star gave her pause. She peeled it open with careful fingers. The heading at the top read, "My Hero, a classroom writing project." Below, in Sophie's slanted, determined handwriting, was a story no teacher could have expected. "My hero is my mom." Claire sat down at the kitchen table. She is my hero because when something very sad happened, she didn't cry in front of me. She made my pancakes and put syrup in a smile shape, even though I know her heart was hurting. She told me Dad was still with us in the little things, like when the toast pops or when we sing in the car. She doesn't get mad when I ask hard questions. She says, "You can always ask." She talks soft but walks strong. She folds my blankets so tight the corners make little triangles. She remembers my bedtime songs even when she's tired. She says Daddy left us a gift, peace, and that's what we're trying to hold. I think a hero is someone who stays even when it's hard. My mom stays, even when people don't. That's why she's my hero. Claire didn't move for a long time. She read the letter 3 times, each word pressing gently into her chest. Not like a weight, but like a balm. Sophie hadn't just absorbed the grief. She had watched everything. The silence, the structure, the strength behind it. Children see more than we want them to. And sometimes they understand before we do. Claire folded the letter with care and slid it into the top drawer of her desk. Not with the legal papers, not with the bills. Somewhere separate, personal. That night, she made Sophie's favorite dinner. Macaroni with extra cheese, no crusts on the toast, apples sliced in stars. They ate together by the window, the hum of the city in the background, soft and distant. After dinner, Sophie climbed into her lap and curled up without a word. Claire held her, brushing a hand through her curls. "You're the bravest girl I know," she whispered. Sophie yawned. "You're the strongest mom." Claire didn't reply. She didn't need to. The house was still. The kind of stillness that wasn't empty, but earned. There would be more storms, more shadows. But this moment was clear. A child had named her mother a hero. And for the first time in weeks, Claire believed it might be true. By the end of the week, the letters began arriving. The first came certified. A heavy envelope with her family's attorney's name printed across the top. Claire didn't recognize the name at first, not until she saw the return address, her parents' town, their zip code. Inside, the language was cold, cautious, and calculated. An inquiry, they called it. A formal request to review the terms of Jonah's will. Phrased carefully enough to avoid sounding aggressive, but pointed enough to make their intentions clear. They wanted a copy of the trust documents. Claire read the letter twice, then set it aside. She didn't call them. She didn't reply. Instead, she called Mr. Benedict. He was already expecting it. "These things tend to ripple," he said calmly. "People don't take exclusion quietly, especially not when it disrupts a sense of entitlement." He offered to handle the response himself. Claire agreed. Days later, another envelope arrived, this one from Josh's lawyer, bolder, more confident. It questioned the validity of Jonah's mental state at the time of signing. cited proximity to a hospitalization Jonah had undergone the year prior, hinted at coercion, influence, undue pressure. Claire smiled bitterly at that. Jonah hadn't needed convincing. He had seen the truth long before she was ready to face it. She forwarded the letter to Benedict. He responded within the hour. "We're well protected," he assured her. "Jonah documented everything. We have recorded conversations, signed statements, and medical assessments. There is no legal ambiguity here." But still, the messages came. Her parents called again. Voicemails layered with concern that never sounded quite sincere. Her father, who had barely spoken at the will reading, now left her a message that ended with, "We just want to make sure everyone's being fair." Claire didn't answer, because fairness had left the room the day they told her to. Call back tomorrow. She kept everything, filed each letter, printed every email. She began her own archive, not because she needed it, but because order gave her control. Each document slid into its place in a binder beside Jonah's will, beside the clause they all kept pretending they hadn't heard. If they contested, they lost, and still, they tried. Not because they believed they would win, but because people like them couldn't let go of the idea that they were owed something, that family ties should bend laws, that shared blood should mean shared spoils. But Jonah had anticipated every move, and Claire now was simply holding the line. The legal responses were sent. The inquiries answered. Mr. Benedict remained composed and thorough. Claire stayed silent. Let them flail. Let them test every door. They would find each one locked. The locks weren't hers. Jonah had built them. She was just holding the keys. It started as whispers. Claire first heard it at the grocery store. 2 aisles over, hushed voices, a pause when she passed. She didn't need to hear the full sentence. She recognized the rhythm of judgment. The same rhythm that had followed her through high school when Josh got caught stealing her car and blamed it on a misunderstanding. The same tone her mother used when saying, "That's just how he is," as if charm was a currency that bought endless forgiveness. Now it was different. Now the story had shifted. Someone had leaked pieces of it. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe one of Jonah's former colleagues. Word had traveled through community threads, church prayer lists, and PTA side chats. Not just that Jonah had passed, not just that the family hadn't shown up, but that the will had drawn a line. And some people had tried to step over it. Claire didn't speak to it. She didn't offer corrections, but she noticed. At Sophie's school, other parents who used to wave politely now lingered in conversation. The librarian who once rushed past her in the hallway stopped to offer condolences and a quiet, "You're handling everything with such grace." Claire thanked her. She didn't ask what she meant by everything. Josh, however, didn't stay quiet. His social media lit up with veiled posts, long captions about betrayal, about being cut out by people who manipulate grief. Claire didn't follow him, but friends forwarded the posts with caution. He was trying to paint himself as a victim. But the tone didn't land the way he expected. Comments were fewer than before. The likes, sparse. The carefully curated image he had built, the successful son, the golden child, began to erode beneath the weight of unanswered questions. Claire noticed it in their parents too. Her mother's voice, when she called, carried the clipped edge of someone who knew her influence was waning. "People are getting the wrong idea," she said once in a voicemail. "You could help fix that." Claire didn't call back, because she wasn't interested in fixing perceptions. She was interested in truth. And if that truth made them uncomfortable, so be it. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. And that clarity was catching up with them. She received a letter from one of Jonah's former colleagues, a quiet man who had once shared coffee with them after a company retreat. His words were simple. "He always spoke of you with a kind of certainty most people never earn. You're honoring him, even in silence." Claire read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and added it to her file. Not because she needed evidence, but because it reminded her that not all voices were loud. Some just carried farther, especially when the noise began to collapse under its own weight. The house had grown quiet in a different way. Not the stunned silence of grief. Not the brittle stillness after loss. But something gentler, intentional. A space no longer waiting for something to return. Claire felt it first in the mornings, the way sunlight hit the kitchen counter, the absence of tension pressing at her shoulders. She began to move through the house with less armor, less caution. Her footsteps sounded more like hers again. It started small. She cleared out Jonah's office. Not in haste, not in a purge. She kept his journals, his watch, the framed photo of Sophie he kept by the window. But she boxed the rest. His books, his papers, the to-do list still pinned to the corkboard. She labeled everything neatly and stored the boxes in the attic. Then she painted the walls. A soft gray, something clean, something that made no demands. She moved her desk in 2 days later. Her laptop, a few plants, a ceramic mug filled with pens. She hung Sophie's hero essay on the bulletin board. Her fingers traced the title once before pinning it in place. The space felt different now. Not because Jonah was gone, but because she had finally stepped into it fully. The next room was the guest bedroom. Claire had avoided it for months. It had become the holding pen for grief. Half-packed boxes, unopened mail, clothes she no longer wore. She cleared it with slow, deliberate care, one item at a time. Each drawer emptied became its own small victory. She bought a twin bed for Sophie's sleepovers, hung up string lights along the window. Let Sophie choose the pillowcases, bright stars, navy blue. They made popcorn together that night and watched an old animated movie on the floor, limbs tangled, laughter light and easy. The next day, Claire ordered new curtains for the living room. Nothing extravagant, just linen with weight. They arrived in a cardboard box and smelled like factory plastic when she opened them, but once hung, they changed the light in the room. Softer, diffused, like breathing through cloth instead of glass. She didn't talk to anyone about it. There was no announcement, no starting over speech. It wasn't reinvention, it was reclamation. Every drawer cleared, every room rearranged felt like a quiet declaration. This space belongs to me again. One afternoon, Claire found herself standing in the middle of the kitchen, hands dusted with flour from baking muffins Sophie had begged for. The radio played softly in the background, an old jazz song Jonah used to hum under his breath. She didn't turn it off. She let it play, not as a wound, but as a memory she could finally hold without flinching. The house hadn't changed. She had. And in that shift something opened, not a door, not a window, but a life. One she was finally ready to live on her own terms. It came tucked inside a manila envelope, separate from the rest of the legal documents. No return address. Just her name in Jonah's handwriting, steady, unhurried, unmistakably his. Claire found it at the bottom of a stack Mr. Benedict had handed her after their last meeting. She hadn't noticed it at first. Too focused on the paperwork, the signatures, the final confirmations. But now, with the house quiet and Sophie asleep down the hall, she sat at the kitchen table and opened it. Inside, 1 page. Folded in thirds. She unfolded it slowly, pressing the creases flat with the side of her hand. Claire. If you're reading this, then it means something happened, and I didn't get to tell you what I should have told you 100 times over. Not just that I love you, but that I saw everything. I saw how you carried the weight no one else would touch. I saw how you gave more than you had and never asked for anything back. I saw how alone you felt sometimes, even with me right beside you. You never needed protecting, not really. But I wanted to leave you something stronger than words, something that would hold its shape long after I was gone. I know who your family is, and I know what they are not. This wasn't about punishment, it was about peace. Yours, Sophie's, the life you should never have to explain or justify to anyone who didn't show up when it mattered. Whatever noise comes after me, let it pass. You don't need to defend anything. You already lived the truth. Let that be enough. And when it feels like too much, like you're holding it all by yourself, remember this. I didn't leave you behind. I just left you ahead. You're the strongest person I've ever known. Don't let them rewrite that. Love always, Jay. Claire didn't cry. Not because she wasn't moved, but because the letter didn't reopen the wound. It sealed it. She folded it carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Then she rose from the table, walked down the hall, and placed it in the top drawer of her nightstand. Not hidden, not displayed, just close. She stood there for a moment, her hand resting on the smooth wood. He had known, not just about the aftermath, but about her, who she was beneath the keeping it together exterior, the woman who showed up even when no one else did. She turned off the light, walked back to the kitchen, and stood at the sink. The house was quiet, warm, whole in a way it hadn't felt for a long time. That letter didn't bring Jonah back, but it gave her something she hadn't realized she still needed. Not closure, but confirmation. That in the end, he didn't just love her. He trusted her to finish the story. It was a Thursday morning when the message came. Simple. Plain text, no punctuation. Can we talk? Claire stared at the screen for a moment, thumb hovering over the reply button. Then she locked the phone and set it face down beside her tea. She didn't need to ask who it was from. Josh had always defaulted to lowercase when he was trying to sound vulnerable. She didn't respond. By noon, another one arrived. I think we should clear the air. Then a third, more pointed. You really froze the account? Claire let the messages accumulate without urgency. Each one a breadcrumb of desperation. Each one a reminder of what he hadn't believed, that she would actually follow through. She walked through the house with a quiet calm. The windows were open. Sophie's laughter echoed faintly from the backyard, where she and a neighbor's child played with sidewalk chalk. Inside, Claire brewed a second cup of tea. She flipped through a book she'd been meaning to finish. The phone buzzed again. She ignored it. That evening, the tone shifted. You're making this worse than it had to be. She almost laughed at that one. The phrasing was so familiar, an accusation disguised as reason. The implication that her response to betrayal was the real offense. Josh had always been more offended by consequences than by the choices that caused them. He called. Once. Twice. Claire let them ring. She finally listened to one voicemail the next morning. His voice was tight, pacing. Somewhere between indignation and forced calm. You know I wouldn't really screw you over, he said. You know me. Yes, she thought. That was the problem. She knew him. She knew the pattern, the charm that arrived just after the damage. the guilt rebranded as confusion, the manipulation wrapped in the softness of shared history. What Josh hadn't counted on was that she no longer needed anything from him. Not explanations, not apologies, not his version of events. The freeze on the account had been confirmed. The fraud report filed. The documentation submitted. There was no space left for narrative, just numbers. Just evidence. And Claire had stopped explaining herself. That weekend, she muted his number. Not blocked, just silenced. She didn't need more drama, more performance. She needed quiet. Let him spiral. Let him invent a new version of what happened. Let him rant to anyone who would listen. That wasn't her concern anymore. She spent Saturday organizing the last pages of the file, printed the final rent receipt, filed the bank's confirmation notice, slipped everything into place, chronological and complete. Then she closed the folder. She didn't need to open it again. Josh had made his final attempt, but Claire had already made her decision. And that decision wasn't up for discussion. It landed on the calendar like a bruise Claire had forgotten about. Josh's birthday. She saw it by accident, flipping through the dates on her phone while scheduling Sophie's dentist appointment. There it was, circled in faded gray, synced years ago from a shared family calendar she never bothered to delete. She stared at it for a moment. Then, without ceremony, she removed the reminder. The date meant nothing now, but Sophie noticed it anyway. That evening, she asked, "Is Uncle Josh coming over today?" Claire looked up from the stove. "No, honey, not this year." Sophie considered that. Because he didn't come when Daddy died? Claire's hand paused on the spoon in the sauce. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she knelt to meet her daughter's eyes. "Because sometimes," she said slowly, "people show you who they really are. And when they do, you have to listen." Sophie nodded, quiet but understanding. Then, after a beat, she asked, "Can we still have cake?" Claire smiled. "We can always have cake." They made one together that night. Vanilla with strawberry frosting, Sophie's choice. She stood on a stool and cracked eggs with theatrical flair while Claire measured flour with calm precision. The kitchen filled with the scent of sugar and something warmer. Peace, maybe. Stability. After dinner, they lit 2 candles, one for Jonah and one for them. Not a birthday, a mark. A quiet recognition that something had shifted a year ago and that it would never return to what it was. Sophie sang a little tune, one she made up on the spot. Then she blew out both flames and clapped once as if sealing a promise. Claire cut the cake and handed her a slice. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat across the table, watching her daughter eat with unburdened joy. No arguments, no side comments, no tension pressing at the corners of the room. Just the sound of forks on plates. Just light laughter and the comfort of earned stillness. Claire thought of Jonah then, not the day he died, not the funeral, but the night he danced with Sophie in the kitchen. Socks sliding on the floor, her giggles rising like bubbles while he twirled her under the glow of the overhead light. That was the kind of memory that held its shape, not grand, but rooted. That was what remained when everything else fell away. Later, after Sophie had gone to bed, Claire stood by the window with the last slice of cake untouched on the counter. The lights in neighboring houses blinked off one by one. The street grew quiet. She didn't think of Josh. She didn't wonder how he was spending his birthday or who he might be blaming now. Some ties break loudly, others dissolve in silence. This one had unraveled entirely, and Claire had no intention of stitching it back together. There was no dramatic ending, no confrontation in a courtroom, no screaming voicemails, no final demand for what he thought he still deserved. Just silence. And that, Claire realized, was the most powerful part. Weeks passed, then months. The call stopped. The letter slowed. What had once been a storm of accusations faded into occasional flickers of attempted contact, unanswered emails, the rare blocked number that still tried once more for old time's sake. But Claire didn't respond. Not out of anger, out of certainty. The will had held. The trust remained intact. The assets untouched, protected. Under the structure, Jonah built, and Claire upheld. The last message from the bank arrived in the form of a final statement, a simple confirmation that Marcus's challenges were dismissed, the trust shielded, the account closed for good. Claire filed it away in the back of the folder, the last page in a thick book of boundaries. She didn't look at the folder anymore. She didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough. Some would call it revenge, but Claire knew better. This wasn't retribution, it was reclamation. Jonah had taught her the value of foresight, but it was her own quiet resolve that carried it across the finish line. Every document she filed, every message she didn't answer, every conversation she declined to engage, that was the vengeance. No drama, just clarity. She thought of what Josh had tried to do, the way he counted on her silence, the assumption that her grief would make her pliable, that she wouldn't dare disrupt the fragile image of family. He had underestimated the one weapon he never saw coming: restraint. Claire didn't shout. She didn't fight for approval. She didn't play the game of mutual blame. She simply shut the doors, drew the line, and let the facts speak for her. And they did, louder than any confrontation could have. On a quiet Sunday morning, Claire and Sophie planted a small tree in the backyard. It was Sophie's idea. "For Dad," she said, "so we can watch it grow." Claire knelt beside her daughter, hands in the soil, sleeves pushed back. The earth was soft, willing. They pressed the roots into the ground and packed it firm. No speeches, no ceremony, just action. Later, after watering the sapling, they sat on the back steps and watched the leaves sway in the breeze. Sophie leaned against her, warm and weightless. Claire breathed in. The air was light again. No tension waiting around corners. No shadow of what might come next. It was over. Not with a bang, but with a choice. To end it without apology. To let truth do the talking. To walk away, not in retreat, but in power. Because vengeance, when built right, doesn't scream. It stands and never wavers.